Hello. Today we'll discuss of the levels of radicalizations. Uh, in these radicalizations, we'll discuss about the levels. There are three levels: micro, meso, and macro. So the micro levels, which for example, the role of government and the society at home and abroad, the radicalizations of public opinion and the party politics taints that majority minority relationship. So especially when it comes the foreign diasporas and the role of the lacking socio-economic opportunities for whole sectors of society, which leads to the mobilizations and radicalizations of the disconnected, some of which might take the from a terrorism. When you see about that macro level, a small system with like families, with that relationship with individual, and if you see about meso levels, for example, that organizations, communities, and political parties and ethnic groups, and in macro level, for example, that nation, the legal systems and economics. So if see about micro level, for example, the individual levels, which involving, for example, identity problems, failed integrations, feelings of alienations, which marginalizations, discriminations, relative uh, deprivations, humiliations, direct or by proxy stigmatizations, and the rejections often that combined with moral outrage and the feelings of uh, that revenge. Right. So we see how the radicalizations, which well-established paradigm. So there are number of things that are widely considered as relatively well-established knowledge about those who have become radicalized towards terrorism. Most terrorists are clinically normal, although their acts and that considers that widely as extra normal in moral terms. And where backgrounds of terrorists are very diverse, there are many paths to terrorism, and there is no single profile of a terrorist. So, so how that radicalization is usually a gradual, which, with fast process. So their grievances play a role, but often more as a mobilization which device than as a personal experiences. So in a social networks and that environments are that crucial in a driving which vulnerable youth to a terrorist movement. So in this ideology, it often plays an important role in that it can which provide the true believer with a license to kill. So then disengagement from terrorism, which often occurs without de-radicalization. So again, if you see about that Clark and Sophie, how they mention that about radicalizations when they come up with the dozen mechanisms of radicalizations on the individual and a group level, which often works in combinations. So if see in individual group level, in individual level that radicalizations through personal grievances. If you see group grievances and love for one already more radicalized. So risk and status, for example, risk and thrill seeking, where slippery slope, slow that progressions of increased radicalizations in which each steps becomes preparations and justifications for a next step. So unfreezing of old social connections, which initiates a search for new sources of connections and meaning in the individual level. So where group which polarizations, where extreme shift in like-minded groups, and groups which isolations, intergroup competitions, then jujitsu, which using the opponents, the strains against him. Then again hate, then martyrdom. So these are kind of points in radicalization. So there are many paths to radicalizations that do not involve in ideology. Although the ideology can be important, however, as a source of justifications for violence. So, so as a recent policy, if you see briefing from the Institute for Strategic Dialogues put it for example that individuals which join as a result of that pursuing injustice and need for some form political activism. So they join to meet socio-cultural needs and the desire for social bonding which stemming from identity issues. So, so they are looking for meaning which these groups provide in the form of ideology and higher narrative. So there are also those who join for personal disadvantage, advantages, uh, which might include access to criminal networks to enhance income, thrill seeking for those looking for excitement, or uh, redemptions for those which wanting to atone for previous misdemeanors. So if you see about the process of radicalizations, so when we see radicalization is usually a gradual phase process which based by that observed by that internal agencies, that radicalizations can also take that place that very fast, not necessarily so. So only the last observed phase might be fast when it last dangerous person come to the notice of that internal agencies. So if you see, there are many models which are depicting the process of radicalizations. One by the first model was that developed by the Randy Borum in 2003, and it lists that four steps of radicalizations to terrorism. So these recognitions by the pre-radicalized individual or group that an event or conditions is wrong, so it's not right. So this is followed with the that forming uh, the framing of the event of conditions as selectively unjust, like it's unfair. So this the third, if you see the third step occurs that when others are held responsible for the that perceived injustice, if you see it's your fault. So there are kind of final that steps which involves in the that demonizations of the other. If you see you are evil. So if you see the process, how that process in the that Joshua Senai models here, how they explain here in the three steps, uh, how that radicalization phase, how in the six groups of the factors works in this diagram. So how this next phases in the Chennai's model, the Joshua Chennai models mobilized in the reach when that certain that catalyst in the form of we see that the triggers, how the triggers that drive vulnerable individuals, and how that opportunity, if, for example, that contacts to the terrorist groups, And if you see about how that capability, for example, training in the use of arms, and that readiness to act of behalf of the terrorist group, which finally there is no there is such the actions phase of target selections and the actual uh, terrorist attacks. So if you see that Joshua, that Chennai, that project, how that this diagram shows that how there is the actions phase of targets, which selections and the actual terrorist attacks happens here. So how this diagram shows that this testimony of the strict model which developed by that fatally M. Asaf in these diagrams in these slides. So how that's the radicalized in the Moscow and the other meetings phase Muslims and move to their third floor in the staircase to the terrorism, and how the smaller group moves up to the that narrowing that staircase in the fourth floor, and some are that recruited to take the last steps to the staircase and commit acts of terrorism when it reaches to the top floor, that fifth floor. So this kind of that issues are there in the yes. So how this initial radicalizations there, the typical recruitment patterns was that frustrated, which migrants became emotionally affected by wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Kashmir, which Chechnya, Bosnia, and Algeria before becoming uh, drawn into the organized supports networking in Europe by recruits. So this kind of that influenced by shocking uh, that imagery and the religious doctrine, which recruits ended up as the newborn believers, that embracing the militant messages of jihadist ideologies with the flavor of God. Thank you.